Greetings everybody and welcome to the first 2019 webinar from Miles and our good friends at Destination Analysts. For the last 11 years plus, the team at Destination Analysts with our support have been researching and reporting on US leisure travelers in all their wonder and color. In now what is a quarterly State of the American Traveler Research Report. So this particular edition looks at the interests, motivations and content that shape decisions on where to go. So, and let me welcome in our very, very good friend, Erin Francis Cummings, who's CEO and founder of Destination Analysts. And I know, Erin, you're just back from a holiday, an exciting holiday, I hope, but probably rather a cold holiday up in Canada.
That's right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I just returned from Whistler, although my knee is not in the same shape that it got to Whistler in.
Very good. So, and I've got a very special guest presenter today. Vince Tartaran is just joined us from Dallas, Texas. So, in fact, Vince is content director at our new Odyssey Content Studio, which has recently become part of the Miles Partnership family. And Vince, welcome in. What content examples are you going to be sharing today on destinations?
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today. Today, we're going to be looking at two exciting culinary examples of what's going on in the user-generated content space.
And I'm going to be jumping in with some examples of user-generated content from countries around the world. Okay, so the slide deck and recording is going to be available, of course, as usual, plus the full research report at these web addresses right here. We've also now added in all the dates and the registration links for all of the State of the American Traveler webinars for all of 2019. And so please visit there, register and share with friends. And I want to give a special shout out to our good friends at DMA West and Southeast Tourism Society as usual, with whom we're hosting the webinar today. DMA West, just in a few weeks in Albuquerque, is going to be hosting their hugely popular Tech Summit. They've got some fascinating new research from Destination Analysts and the DMA West Foundation on social media audiences. What are the key drivers of success and performance in the social media vertical? And yours truly, with a panel of CVBs, is going to be giving an update on the Google DMO Partnership Program. So Southeast Tourism Society has got a range of 2019 events just in, 3 weeks here. The Connections at Daytona Beach. Of course, that's a trade show, it's an award ceremony, as well as an education conference. So some great content there and a good chance, of course, to enjoy some sun on the beach in Florida. I think everybody's very familiar with webinars. I want to particularly call out the question box. You can see it there at the bottom of the webinar panel. So please enter any questions. We'll be answering them live during the webinar, and at the end, we'll be coming back to both Vince and Erin to see if there's additional questions that we can answer. So please use that question box. So the agenda for today, so Erin's going to join us to present their research in two parts, starting off with their regular update on US traveler sentiment. And there's some really fascinating, perhaps even troubling sort of indications of some change there. Then Erin's going to be looking at the Destinations Edition research. What are the key drivers, motivations, interests that shape decisions on where to go? Vince and myself are going to be looking at engaging destination content from around the world with a particular focus on user-generated content. And then we'll look at a few additional resources and come back to your questions. So without further ado, let me pass over to Erin for the latest results on the State of the American Traveler Destinations Edition. Over to you, Erin.
Thank you, and thank you again, Chris and the Miles Partnership team, for your sponsorship of this decade-plus long research. For those of you on the webinar that are new to the State of the American Traveler, I just want to review the methodology before we jump into the latest data. The State of the American Traveler is a quarterly online tracking survey that we've conducted since 2006. We send a invitation out to a nationally representative sample of American adults who are then screened for leisure travel behavior. We collect a sample of over 2,000 American leisure travelers for each of these surveys. And it was really meant to examine traveler sentiment, motivations, and behaviors and other topics of interest to help destination marketers get more travelers to their respective destinations. What I'll be sharing with you today primarily comes from the latest survey, which was completed in January of this year, but I do have some historical data to share with you too for context. So as always, I'll begin with travel sentiment, and I'm probably, with the photo I used, giving away how I feel when I look at the latest data. It is indeed to the point where it's, we should take some pause. We certainly, what we're seeing in the data is certainly not going to enjoy the booming growth that we've seen over the last several years. So we'll start with a sentiment about the number of trips that American travelers anticipate that they're going to be doing in 2019. And we always ask this question: in the next 12 months, do you expect to travel more or less for leisure than you did in the most recent 12-month period? And if you focus on the top of the chart that you're seeing here on the left, that's the results for January 2019. So while 58% said that they expect to travel the same amount, same number of trips as they did last year, 33.4% said they expect to travel more for leisure in the next 12 months. And on its own, that looks like a very positive finding, that a third of American leisure travelers say they have more optimism about their travel for 2019. But if we look at that in a historical context, that's actually comparing back over the last 2 years, so winter of 2017 and winter of 2018, you see that's quite a drop. In the winter of 2018 and 2017, that number was at 37% or 37.9%. Another troubling finding is that January, or our winter edition, is typically when American travelers are feeling amongst their most optimistic. So to see a drop like that, really when they should be showing the most optimism, is again a cause for pause. Let's look at spending now. So similarly, we ask if, as they look forward into the year, if they expect to spend more or less on leisure travel than they did in the past 12 months. And again, just under a third now said they expect to spend more for leisure in the next 12 months, which on its own looks fairly positive, but in a historical context, again, it's quite a drop from what we saw back in January of 2017, when that number was at 37.5%. And even 1 year ago when it was at 37 or 36.5%. And the overall volume of trips that Americans said they've taken in the past year, so think of this as what they said they did in 2018, we see that that has also fallen off. So we look at a 2-year average, is typically around 4.2 trips that Americans said they're traveling, or that they had taken. And in the January of this year, the average number of trips that Americans said that they had taken was at 3.8. So nearly half a trip lower than they had been doing in the previous years. We look at spending on leisure travel. So what they anticipate that they will be spending for all the leisure travel they're going to do in 2019, including airfare, accommodations, anything else related to their trips in the next year. We see that travel budgets are also down, not an enormously large percentage. It's at 5.6%, but you see all these factors together and don't make for a super booming picture about domestic travel. And then in terms of how travel fits in as a priority for the money that they have available, We see also the percent of American travelers that say that travel spending will be at least somewhat of a high priority for them. Well, it's 59.6%. That is down from nearly 2/3 who said the same last year. And in looking all this together, I felt that in this picture, we really also need to look at what's deterring travel. I shared with you that the number of trips is down. So what really is preventing Americans from traveling as much as they would like? And it's always the same villains in this story: personal finances, work, and the cost of travel. Over 1/3 of American travelers say those things have prevented them from traveling as much as they like. And we, as a travel industry, don't have a way to impact personal financial decisions or work. We can, in some degree, influence the cost of our services and products. But I thought it was interesting. I wanted to share with you too some other things that are deterring travel to a degree that we may not have anticipated. With our friends at US Travel, we added some new deterrents to test in this latest edition, and they were actually fairly strong compared to some of the other deterrents that we had traditionally tested. So interestingly, almost 1 in 5 American travelers said that difficulty coordinating trip plans and logistics with their travel companions kept them from traveling as much as they would like. And then, we've experienced so much growth in travel and tourism in the last years, and we've all been hearing about how much overcrowding there is in destinations, and we see that is impacting travel to some degree. So 14.6% said that road traffic kept them from taking as many trips as they would like, and just under 14% said overcrowding at places that they want to visit kept them from traveling as much as they would like. So before we move on to the destination research, just to take away from the economic indicators, we really see that we've entered a more cautious period, and thus that's just going to make it more competitive to be a travel marketer. And if you had put significant growth in travel volume as part of your plans for the next 1, 2, 3 years, that may be more challenging than you anticipated. Okay, so let's look at where Americans want to go and the how and the why behind that. So I'm going to start with what it is about destinations that gets American travelers interested. So what are really the attributes about destinations that they are interested in experiencing? So we tested several factors, and there are very clear hierarchy here. So the top 3 attributes about a destination or about a trip experience that get Americans going the most are enjoying scenic beauty and having the ability to be outside and active outside, and they love beach destinations and resorts. And then we have a good set of second-tier attributes that Americans are really interested in: road trips, historical attractions, national and state parks, cuisine and food experiences, and then also going out into smaller towns and rural destinations and attractions. And then we have a third tier under here. And again, this more than 50% of American travelers say they're interested or extremely interested in these experiences. So it's quite a lot, even though it is this third tier here. But foreign travel, urban experiences, festivals and special events, arts and culture, third tier, but a lot of strong interest in having those experiences. And we see those interests play out in the types of trips that Americans do end up taking. So the infographic you're showing here shows the percent of American travelers who have taken one of these types of trips. And in the middle there, of that group of travelers who's taken that type of trip, how many trips they've taken on average. So I'll just call out a few here of interest. We saw Americans love road trips, and they're taking them. 82.1% of American travelers said that they had taken a road trip in the last year. Over half have taken a trip that included a plane ride. And then regional trips, staying closer to home. About 6 in 10 Americans have done that. If you are a destination that attracts or is good for multi-gen trips, almost 3 in 10 American travelers has taken a trip that included 3 or more generations. Something else I want to call out, though, and we can see it in this data here of certain trip types in particular, is that there are types of destinations and experiences that are not fully realizing the volume that they could be getting based on what American travelers say they're interested in. So for example, when I showed you the destination attribute chart, I showed you that national parks and state parks, there's strong degrees of interest in them. Same with festivals and special events. But when we look at the types of trips that Americans are actually taking, they're showing twice as much interest in those trips as the trips they're actually taking. So we look at that as an opportunity for those types of destinations, or perhaps if your destination has a big festival or special event, that there's perhaps some reason that Americans are not acting on that interest. Whether it is that they just need to learn more or be pushed in certain ways, different emotional factors need to be shown to them. But there is opportunity to capitalize on that interest that they have in those types of experiences. This next set of data that I'm going to show you is based on this question, and it's the number of trips to different types of destinations that Americans could take in 2019. And so what you'll be seeing here, the blue bar shows you the percent of American travelers who say they plan on visiting this type of destination in 2019. And that orange bar shows you the number of trips they say they will take to each of those types of destinations. And we have the historical data here from 2016 through our most recent edition of 2019. And this graph really shows which types of destinations we feel may bear the brunt of that reduction in the overall number of trips that Americans are taking, and perhaps the overall a further reduction of trips. Well, you'll see that many of our destination types are flat in terms of the percent of Americans say that they want to visit that destination, and the overall number of trips they say they will visit there. Like, for example, in the middle here, beach destinations. Americans don't seem to be giving up their beach destinations. But on the left there, we do see some decline for our cities and urban areas, as well as our small towns and rural destinations. So there is a small decline in the percent of Americans saying they're going to visit those types of destinations, and the number of trips they say they will take to those destinations. And again, looking at other types, you see the same story here. They're very flat on these other destination types. And then if you look at it all together, we see on the left there, there's our cities and our rural areas. Again, those are the ones showing the declines, and again, may bear the brunt of this perhaps reduction in travel amongst Americans. All right, so what destinations are on the top of Americans' minds as they look out to 2019? I'm going to start with the international destinations. So we ask an open-ended question. What are the 5 foreign countries that you would most like to visit in the upcoming year? And we ask them to please only list countries that they might reasonably expect to visit. So if they do not have the budget to visit Antarctica, we ask them to not list that, despite that possibly being at the top of a bucket list, but where they reasonably could expect to visit in the next year. And the results are in. The UK came out on top, closely followed by France and Italy. Our neighbors in Canada and Mexico have a strong degree of interest amongst Americans. And then even going east, Japan, Australia. However, last night I looked at this by the percent of Americans who had actually taken an international trip. And I shared with you again earlier, there's a lot of interest amongst Americans for taking international trips, although not as many of them are doing it. But amongst Americans who have taken an international trip in the last year, this chart comes out a little bit different. So France takes the #1 spot amongst Americans who have actually traveled abroad. And then overall, a lot of the destinations rise in terms of the number of Americans who say that they want to visit that foreign country in the next year. And so those of you on our webinar from the Caribbean islands or from that part of the world, when I look at Americans who've actually traveled abroad, there's a strong increase in the number that listed a Caribbean destination as one of the international places that they want to visit in the next year. All right, so let's get back to the United States. What are the 5 domestic destinations Americans say they would most like to visit in the next year? And here's how we looked in 2019. New York came out on top, closely followed by Las Vegas and Orlando. And my good friend Chris here thought it might be fun to look back a decade or so and how the rankings may have changed. So I'll give you a minute to look here at how what was top for Americans in 2008, and then we'll look here how that's changed into 2019. So New York has indeed taken the top spots from Las Vegas, and Los Angeles has risen above its Chicago and the center and Washington, D.C. and the east. Miami has seen strong growth as well. But where Americans want to go is, as you might expect, very different depending on what generation that you're in. So looking at this data, I found that certain destinations are more appealing the younger you are and get less appealing the older you get, and it's the reverse for some other destinations. So Gen Z, our most recent generation that we welcome to travel, independently at least, they love Los Angeles and New York, more so even than any of the other generations. But for both these destinations, it looks like the older you get, the less you have these cities on the top of your mind. This really surprised me. I'll let you take a second to guess, but baby boomers love Las Vegas. So while Las Vegas obviously is on the top of many Americans' lists, it is actually a destination that gets higher on the list the older you get, which again was surprising to me given how much we associate Vegas with debauchery that we again associate with younger. But no, Vegas gets more love the older that you get. Also, Denver and Seattle are cities that I found in the data have quite an appeal with the younger generations. And then 2 cities that get even better the older you get as an American are New Orleans and San Francisco. We wanted to dig deeper this time into why certain destinations make these lists. So we asked the question when they listed in an open-ended format where they wanted to go. And we piped in their top response and said, okay, last week you said you wanted to visit this city in the next year. And then we gave them a list of reasons why they had that city top of their mind. And so here's the combined findings and what motivates aspiration for these destinations. And surprisingly, the most common response was that they visited before and want to return. Also, having friends and family in a destination does generate a lot of aspiration to want to visit. But beyond those 2 things, the general atmosphere, food and cuisine, those were very paramount to what was motivating aspiration. Then adventure, beaches, shopping, history, connecting with nature. But of course, that's very different by the type of destination that's on the top of your list. And so to give you a sense of how that changes by the type of traveler who's attracted to these destinations, let's take a look at New York, people who listed New York City versus those that listed Las Vegas versus those that visited national parks. And so for New York, having visited before wanting to return, of course, is important, but food and cuisine is the top reason that people have New York on their list for this year. Also, they see shopping come up and arts and culture as well. For Vegas, clearly the experience that Vegas puts out there gets visitors to want to return. People who have Vegas on the list are also driven by food, but we see nightlife and adventure come up strongly for Vegas, or we don't see that show up for other types of destinations. And for our national parks, the atmosphere there connecting with adventure, we see bucket lists come up for a reason for national parks as well as history. And then we track the brand performance of over 65 US destinations, and we always map it in this way. So what you're looking at here, the size of the bubble for these destinations represents how familiar American travelers feel they are with those destinations. And then where that bubble appears along this x-axis here is the percent, based on the percent of Americans who feel they're likely to visit that destination in the next 3 years. And then on the y-axis, the percent of Americans that find that destination appealing or extremely appealing. And the story, every time we've mapped this, is basically the same in that familiarity is really going to drive all your other brand performance metrics up. And so, of course, that's strongly a reason why we need to do great travel marketing. But this exercise is important for destinations to do, because you can see where there's real gaps in aspiration. So, and then where you're, I would even say from some of our smaller, lesser known destinations where they're really overperforming. So there's not maybe strong degrees of familiarity, but they've done a good job with making them what people associate about them, and they're still saying that it's appealing and that there's aspiration to visit those destinations. All right, and let's move into how, in terms of resources at least, people are getting ideas for how or where they want to go. So we asked our survey respondents to think specifically about how they get their inspiration for the destinations that they want to visit domestically. And we gave them a list and asked which they would typically use to find destination ideas and inspiration. And the opinions of friends and relatives through direct contact was the most common response. In all, almost two-thirds of American travelers said that direct contact with their network was a source of inspiration. And then nearly 3 in 10 said those opinions, but through a social media platform, were a source of inspiration. And then I'll call out offline media here too. So in total, 1 in 5 Americans said traditional media was a source of destination inspiration. But of course, the story is different when we look at the generations. So in terms of getting the opinions of others through social media platforms, Gen Z, millennials, over 40% of American travelers in those generations are using those platforms to get inspiration for where they want to visit in the next year. And if we look at traditional media, while our boomers are using social media clearly, traditional media they're still strongly more likely to use traditional media to get ideas for where to travel to. And the reason I point this out is if you're wanting to attract travelers that are from these generations, it's important for you to be where they're looking for inspiration. And you clearly see that there are some differences in where these audiences are. And finally, we decided this year to start to benchmark what American travelers feel the anticipated impact of climate change is going to be on their travel. So we asked, which ways do you think or you expect climate change will impact your travel in the next 5 years? And what we found is that half of Americans expect that climate change will indeed impact their travel at some point in the next 5 years. And in which ways? Well, 1 in 5 of those of American travelers say that climate change is going to actually change the destinations that they choose to visit. Most commonly, so about 3 in 10 right now, say that it's going to change the timing of their trips. And 15.2% said it's going to change how they travel overall. And just to give you a deeper understanding of what that may mean, we had an open-ended question in which they described that impact. And it was I'm sorry, I thought I had a slide here of quotes for you to share. It'll be in the final deck that we sent out. But a lot of it was centered around weather and natural disasters. But there's also this sentiment that wanting to not, in a personal way, not put so much impact on the places that they travel to be much more thoughtful about their own personal impact on those places. So, in summary, delivering a really positive experience to your visitors while they're in market really is key to driving continued demand for your destination. That was very clear in the data. Travelers are strongly motivated by a beautiful environment in which they can be outside doing things and experiencing great food. If you want to inspire younger travel audiences to come to your destination, you need to have a great social strategy. And then for our older travel audiences, traditional media is certainly a place where you want to be to inspire them. And we see that climate change is already having an impact on how Americans are thinking about travel and where they're choosing to travel. And I'll be back on for Q&A, but for now, I'll pass it back over to my friends, Chris and Ryan. Oh, I'm sorry, actually, before I go, just to remind everyone, we have several upcoming studies that you may be interested in following. We have our State of the International Traveler Study, which studies global travelers in 14 top markets in the United States. We have the State of the American International Traveler, which is an in-depth study of Americans who travel abroad and where they want to go and why. We have our CVB in the Future of the Meetings Industry study, and then our destination website Net Promoter Score co-op.
Thanks a lot, Erin. Just one question before we move on, and we'll come back to questions at the end. We've got a question about leisure travel, that combination of business and leisure travel. So how do you treat that in the State of the American Traveler, which is primarily focused on leisure travel?
Well, I'm glad you asked. We actually had a set of questions in which we looked specifically at leisure travel in our travel segments edition last summer. So whoever you are, if you want to shoot me an email at Erin@Destination Analyst, I will send you a mini deck on the findings from that. And it was fascinating to see the number of Americans that do leisure travel and why they do it. We actually asked for their reasons of why they signed up for leisure, and the funniest one to me is a number, and it was driven mainly by our younger travelers, but a number said that they've leisure traveled to inspire their friends and get them like jealous about what they were doing.
Thanks a lot, Erin. Yeah, fascinating area in terms of that whole interplay between business and leisure. So I'm going to call on Vince Tartarian in a moment to join me, but we wanted to have a closer look at what is the content that actually drives decisions around where to go. So we've seen the research in terms of what are the broader factors, but what's the content that inspires these choices? And this year, we've been looking at this for the last several years in terms of a gallery of impactful content examples from around the world. We wanted to take a closer look at UGC and social media content in particular. So obviously UGC content, user-generated content, comes in an increasing range of different types and formats, from blogs and ratings and reviews to social media feeds, crowdsourced campaigns, and even user-generated videos. So we're going to look at the importance of UGC in social media and then have a look at 2 US case study examples that Vince will highlight. But before that, I'll look at 3 international examples that highlight the sort of variety and depth. And just to remind you again of some of the research figures we've seen, the critically important word of mouth, traditional word of mouth, has always been fundamental in travel and tourism, and it remains fundamental to decisions on where to go. And we saw how that can be amplified through social media. But if we think about user-generated content, and of course this blurs the lines between what is user-generated versus social, fully over half of all US leisure travelers use user-generated content at some point in their trip planning process, and the percentage is very similar for social media. So if we look beyond just the destination decision, both UGC and social are critically important at all points in the trip planning process. With destination analysts, we've been monitoring this for over the last decade or so, and we've seen dramatic shifts both in the last few years, but also if we go back historically, we see the dramatic rise of UGC. So let's jump into our international examples. And we're going to start off in Newfoundland and Labrador. And they worked with Crowdriff and a local agency partner to create a compelling user-generated content experience called the Iceberg Finder. So they built a content platform which relies entirely on UGC and social for updates. And you can see how basically new imagery is constantly being added. So really positioning Newfoundland as one of the most accessible places in the world to have remarkable experiences in terms of interacting with icebergs. So for any event or experience that's ephemeral and fast changing, and so much of travel is, of course, just like icebergs, UGC and social media content can keep your experiences and your destination looking fresh and relevant and timely. So let's jump across the Atlantic and have a look at Copenhagen. And wonderful Copenhagen's been a world leader in sustainable tourism for some time, and that includes engaging with their community in very real and meaningful ways. So they celebrate this concept of localhood, which is about encouraging visitors to experience Copenhagen like locals, and their content strategy reflects that, of course. They've got a series called Do Like the Locals, where they engage with local residents who share their 9 top experiences or attractions on the reasons why they love their city and their region around Copenhagen. So community engagement is going to be increasingly important, or is important for many DMOs, and UGC content's one way where you can both feature locals, and that can be positive for both them and visitors. Certainly from a local's perspective, building that sense of pride in their community and hosting visitors from around the world. And then the third international example I just wanted to highlight was from my home country, New Zealand, and topics which are trending on social media and in UGC have long inspired some really creative campaigns by tourism marketers. They can make them very authentic and timely and relevant. And this is a great example in terms of Tourism New Zealand leveraging a long-term community and online conversation that's been going on around New Zealand being missed off maps all over the world. Some would say it's a conspiracy by our good friends in Australia. Others have additional reasons, but basically what Tourism New Zealand did was tap into this conversation and community and amplified it. And of course, they connected with a celebrity comedian, and indeed with even the Prime Minister of New Zealand was part of this campaign to sort of tell the story in a very fun and real and engaging way. The other critical part of this, of course, is tying your user-generated content into the rest of your marketing messages and content. And for Tourism New Zealand, they did a very deft integration with their position as New Zealand is the home of Middle Earth. Of course, leveraging off the hugely popular Lord of the Rings series. So let me pass over to Vince now, who's going to dive into two specific Texas case studies on user-generated content. Over to you, Vince.
Awesome. And so with that, we'll look at two compelling content case studies within the Texas space. And the first one is with one of our destinations called Visit Plano. And for those who don't know where Plano is, it's a city just north of Dallas in the DFW area. About a year ago, they launched a program called That's Tempting, which was to call attention to them emerging as a culinary destination, reaching those within that regional 200-mile drive radius. And because Texas is so large, a lot of that does include other Texas cities, but it does also include a lot of touch states based on how far north Texas, or how far north Plano actually is. So when the program first started, I was created with long form content that was professionally shot and edited between both the agency and the CVB to inspire visitors to come and visit Plano as a place to eat. So really using culinary as one of the primary drivers to come to this destination. Because Plano does have 800 unique to Plano restaurants, so a lot of the large restaurant chains that are in Texas actually have been birthed out of this city in particular. But one of the things that we began to notice was everyone consumes content in different ways. And taking a nod from large giants like Amazon and Facebook Watch, we've noticed that the amount of time that people are willing to spend on content actually has been starting to decrease. And so they are releasing new forms of episodic television and shorter forms of content to finally transition, that really reaches audiences in a completely different way, and quite honestly, a completely different type of user. So Visit Plano decided to tap into user-generated content via Crowdriff. And so what they did was they identified a list of restaurants that they wanted to pull into the program that they didn't get to do the first time around, and go into Crowdriff, start beginning to identify which video and photo content they felt would speak to users, and splice them into these short form content videos that you see here. And you can tell that these are quite opposite from the, I would say, more polished long form videos that you previously saw. But it is created entirely from user generated content. It's meant for audio off consumption, so someone can just watch it and it would autoplay within the social space. All of this content then rolled up into a landing page on the Visit Plano website, where the videos are all hosted via Facebook, and then the page actually redirects users into other areas of the Visit Plano website, such as trip planning and itineraries, and ultimately to the other culinary aspects of the website. So one of the biggest things that we noticed by incorporating user-generated content into the program was the amount of engagement in terms of video view time has already exceeded, since it's been implemented to the program, from just the long-form videos that we did in year one. So in year one, there was 180 hours of total video view time, and since incorporating user-generated content in January of this year, so just a few months now, we're already up to over 200 hours of total video view time, which is a combination of both the short form and long form content. And so this is already a clear indication to us that user-generated content is, again, being repurposed in a meaningful and powerful way, but also used to highlight existing programs on behalf of the CVB. Before we go into the next example, Some of you may have heard of a term UDC, or user-directed content, and so I just wanted to kind of shed some light on the differences between user-generated content and user-directed content. So user-generated content is really content that is generated by the general public and then uploaded into the social space, where destinations can identify and request rights to content that is, I would say, casually being uploaded on behalf of a user. User-directed content, or UDC, is something that's controlled from start to finish. So a brand can set the guidelines for what type of content they want, or best put, the destination creates and owns the shot list. Really, the biggest distinction between the two is a destination may not have to go out and look for the right assets to request, when they can create an experience or ecosphere for users to submit specific types of content that they are looking for. So this first example is with Visit Dallas, who wanted to better tell the story of the birthplace of the frozen margarita machine, which was invented in Dallas, Texas, just shy of 50 years ago. So they wanted to create an experience around it that the local community and travelers could get involved in, again, to attract those regional travelers within a 200-mile radius. So incorporating a piece of software called Cinebody, Visit Dallas was able to create a user-directed content program that allowed users to upload content in a meaningful way in terms of following the directions that Visit Dallas had set for the type of content that they wanted to get. So users are able to log into the Cinebody program, look through a list of active projects where they would identify the Margarita Mile project from Visit Dallas. They're then able to read about the project, get an understanding of what all is involved, and once they join with the unique code, they were able to go into a shot list, which you see on the right, with various things like tell us what you like better, frozen or on the rocks, show us where you're at, and talk to us. One of the most coolest things about the Cinebody experience for user-directed content is that everything happens in real time. So as users are uploading content to those specific shot list that was created, it automatically goes into the cloud. And from there, someone can be online and select the good content and separate it from the okay content, and then be able to identify who is contributing the most content. So this is another way to identify influencers as well in your destination. And it being in real time, we also have the opportunity to send out push notifications as a requirement with using the Cinebody experience. And so this was also something that Visit Dallas used to incentivize at the beginning of the program, with giving away free Cowboys tickets, complimenting drink programs from existing restaurants that are a part of the Margarita Mile experience, and then roll everything up into a compelling call to action to come experience the Margarita Mile. And with the large amount of content that was uploaded to the program, we're then able to put everything out into the social space every couple of weeks and keep everything fresh and engaging. And one of the most interesting things that we saw was, yes, the local community got involved. Yes, travelers were coming and participating in the program, but then it kind of bled over into a few other markets, such as meeting planners on fam tours. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here just in terms of overall incentive. But these look very similar to what you would probably find on Instagram stories, maybe a little bit of vlog type content, as well as the general Facebook and Instagram. Overall, with the content that was released throughout the program, it had over 60,000 video views, 400 comments on Facebook and Instagram, and 500 pieces of rights-owned content, meaning that Visit Dallas can tap into any of these 500 video clips rights approved from the get-go. And once you contribute to a program, that can translate over to any new program that you'd like to release. And so maybe this goes beyond the Margarita Mile and it goes into conferences, or it goes into festivals that happen every single year in your destination. All it takes is one push notification and then everyone is aware of that next project. But I did want to call out one thing that is really interesting. So user-directed content is more or less a new term, but it's already beginning to evolve. And so up until a few months ago, the Cinebody experience was really a separate app experience where users had to download and participate. But now they are releasing their IP to where you can actually integrate it into an existing destination app environment. So users could actually tap into this and start filming directly within your destination-based app, where you can then repurpose and create a deliverable that then goes out within 24 hours to keep the spirit alive of whatever that activity or attraction that you are trying to highlight. And with that, I will pass that back.
Thanks, Vince. One quick question before I jump into these takeaways. So when you say short format, how short is short?
So what we've seen to be most impactful is anything for the Margarita Mile experience anyway, was anything between 45 seconds to a minute long. And these were really just a short form sort of call to action to quickly go out and participate in the program. And a lot of it was incentivized, but it was things that the destination was already giving away. So we were kind of just repurposing those for this type of content.
Very good. And of course, even shorter format video has become hugely popular through platforms like Facebook, certainly in terms of advertising media. So certainly in terms of video, there's a whole range of what is short that's appropriate given the right audience and market. Okay, so just before we come back to some final questions, some key takeaways from today, and then I'll just share a couple of resources. So obviously we saw from Aaron, there's some early indications that perhaps tourism is plateaued. Maybe there's a little bit of softness there. So certainly monitoring these trends and having a think about your competitive response is going to be important. So more tactical marketing initiatives may need to be implemented more quickly than perhaps you've otherwise thought. These long-term challenges. So whether it's the threat and impact of climate change, and you can see that's already having an influence on trip planning decisions, and of course, extreme weather events have become more pronounced and are impacting travel. So, you know, thinking about your planning, your response, your disaster recovery plans, and your communication around that. And obviously, critically around content, does it match the key motivations for travelers, and what are the ones that are specific to you? And then major cities and rural areas, if you dive into the research, seem to have some particular challenges in terms of really motivating travelers to have a close look at them. There's a little bit of softness in the data around both major cities and rural areas for different reasons, but have a look at that in the research report that we'll be sharing after this. And then of course, refine and revitalize your content strategy, and UGC and social is a key part of that. Just to remind everybody, the slide deck, the recording of the webinar, all the dates and the registration forms for all the upcoming editions of State of the American Traveller are available at these web addresses. And you can see we've got dates in both May, August, and really interestingly, we're going to be having a special edition in November. So we're actually going to be crowdsourcing the topic or topics that are going to be looked at by destination analysts. So we'll be going out to all of our participants in the webinar series and the wider group, that community we've got around this, to solicit ideas for what are the topics that are of interest to you. Timely and relevant about issues such as community engagement and sustainability. We've launched this Over Tourism Toolkit, a set of resources that cover various elements of managing the destination experience. We've got an update to the Google DMO Partnership Program, including a great case study on the work and results in Bermuda. And with that, we'll come to the final questions that we've got here. So, Erin, quick question for you from Jennifer. She's asking about the timing of the research that you highlighted, for example, the international traveller research.
Oh, the State of the International Traveler, we just wrapped up data collection and we should have the reports available in about 6 weeks.
Okay, and the US International Traveller?
That is in development and that should be being fielded in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, and Nandi wanted to clarify, what do you mean by older travellers? So do you mean older travellers are sort of 50 plus? Are you including sort of Gen Xers in that?
So when I said older, I was referring to boomers and pre-boomers.
Okay, very good. Okay, so in terms of the videos that you've shown, Vince, we've got a question here about the production time. So you get in all this UGC video, but Bill is asking how much time does it take to actually turn that around and polish it up into something that you can then distribute and share?
Sure. So with the crab reef content in the Plano example, those were about a day turnaround time. So those were, we basically identified what kind of template. So we knew that there was going to be a certain amount of lines of copy and a certain flow. So that also helped in identifying what types of content we wanted. And then in the Visit Dallas example with Cinebody, that content was about a 2 to 3 day turnaround, but we've also been able to do it as fast as 24 hours, depending on the type of deliverable, and maybe there was some timing associated with that as well. I guess one of the best things about, although there are other apps out there available or software available to do this, one of the best things that we found is because you can set the parameters, you can set the FPS, and you can set the orientation requirement, meaning landscape or vertical. That did really help in the Cinebody experience because it controls the settings already in the user's phone. So we already know what kind of content that we're going to get in terms of how much it would take to edit that content from there.
Yeah, and I should mention, obviously, Cinebody is a very powerful solution. It's a particular sort of proprietary platform, but the concept of user-directed content or curated content where you provide direction to users to create and to share with you certain content can, of course, be applied across a number of tools and platforms. So have a look at the best practices holistically in terms of how you apply that. Okay, so we've got a question, Erin, about the actual sampling for the State of the American Traveller. It's all US leisure travelers, a representative sample of all US leisure travelers?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and we've got a question here just finally from Sherry. She's picking up on a point I made about some of the data showing some softness in terms of travel intentions to major cities and rural or small communities. She's noting she listened to a podcast with you that shared trends for 2019 that was towards small cities and rural or off the beaten path destinations. So any comments or feedback about that?
Yes, so what we see in this latest State of the American Traveler data, now again, those areas are still attracting a lot of interest. It's just as there's this economic weakening, it looked like those two types of destinations are, when people, like I showed, are giving up half a trip on average, it looked like from this finding it was going to be a trip to one of those destinations. But again, in the overall picture though, you know, while, you know, national park visitation is flat, it's still not at the volume of our cities and our rural destinations. So they are getting a large share of travel. It's just that when people have to give up half a trip or are giving up half a trip, it looks like from this data that those are the types of destinations that they're going to give up that half a trip on.
Yeah, I think that's likely to be related to, increasing pressures on the length of the trip, i.e. the time you can take to get into these out of the way places. And there was a feeling around the big cities, the dramatic increase in hotel costs and accommodation costs may be having an impact there.
Yes, absolutely. But yes, so it's always not the fun to have to present data that, again, makes people pause. But I certainly hope for our smaller and rural destinations is absolutely not meant to get anyone in a panic. Again, there's still a lot of travel happening. You're still one of the destinations that people say they're going to put one of their trips towards. It's just that if they have to give up something, it looked like our cities and small towns were where they were going to give it up. Our beach destinations were not giving, no, people seem not to want to give up their beach.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Vince, and thank you to the audience for joining us for this first edition of the State of the American Traveller for 2019. It's been wonderful spending time with you. Don't hesitate to reach out to any of the presenters or anybody at Destination Analysts or Miles, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Have a great rest of your day.